I'll go into this.
That's why I made extra keys and put a key
It's on
in
your,
the keychain just in
wait,
case.
no, Ron. Ron,
Yes,
we
sir.
can hear you.
Oh, damn.
I believe we're live.
We're live, Ron. Go on. There we go.
We're live now.
Afternoon, and welcome to the House Judiciary Committee on January 27th, 2021. This first hour of our hearings today is going to be going to involve the fiscal briefing from the Department of Legislative Services. And we have with us today Maureen Merslak and David Romans, who are here, or at least Maureen is here. And oh, there's David too. And they're going to take us through our fiscal briefing. And then at 2:30, we're going to have we're going to begin our bill hearings for which we have 35 witnesses, so not too terrible. But with that, we'll go to DLS. Who would like to begin?
David Romans, I'm going to be doing the presentation. Maureen is going to share the screen so you can see the document that I'm talking about. So it's a long document. We're just going to cover kind of the highlights of the budget, and then I'm happy to answer any questions the committee members have, as that's usually the more useful way to do this. So just starting out here on the first slide, it's a $49.3 billion budget for fiscal 22 that the governor has proposed, about $1 billion less than the current fiscal year. It's less because we got a lot of one-time federal money in the current fiscal year from the CARES Act, and because our SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, has extremely high caseloads right now, and those are expected to dissipate in fiscal 22 as the economy recovers. So we get a lot of federal money from the SNAP program and the CARES Act. We expect that to start going away in fiscal 22. That's why the overall budget goes down. State general fund spending actually grows by more than $1 billion. The governor would leave a fund balance at the end of the current year of over $265 million. He'd leave a fund balance in the proposed budget for fiscal 22 of close to $200 million. He also leaves nearly $1 billion in the rainy day fund, which is about 5% of general fund revenues. It is worth noting that the December federal stimulus money that will come through the state budget is not in the budget at the moment. So that will probably be added by the governor later in the session. So the budget doesn't include that roughly $1.3 billion that'll pass through the state budget. And it makes no assumptions about any additional money that may come to the state through President Biden's proposals and whatever Congress does with those proposals. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so the kind of key feature of the governor's budget is outlined in the first chart on this page, and that's tax relief. So he has a relief act that there's been quite a bit of talk about, and it has three components that impact the general fund budget in the near term. The first is exempting unemployment benefits from income taxation. That would reduce general fund revenues by about $50 million in the current year, $20 million next year. The second is to provide stimulus payments to individuals and families who received the earned income tax credit for tax year 2019 or will qualify for it in tax year 2020. The maximum payment a family could get if it claimed the ITC in both years is $750 for the family, $450 for an individual. And that costs the state about $267 million. The third component is some relief for businesses. So businesses collect the sales tax on behalf of the state and then remit it to the state. The governor's proposal would let businesses for a 4-month period keep up to $3,000 each month of what they collect. So for a maximum of $12,000. It is limited to businesses that have sales in that month of $100,000 or less. So really large businesses, some of the online vendors would not qualify for any relief. It's really trying to target it to smaller businesses. And that costs us about $300 million. That would go into effect the month after the bill passes. It is an emergency bill, so it could go into effect very soon if the General Assembly acts quickly. So that's the Relief Act parts of the tax provisions. The governor also has some other tax changes that are more ongoing in nature, and some have been introduced in prior years and not passed. So one relates to military retirement income, another related to hometown heroes. The governor also wants to expand the research and development tax credit. And the really big one, but it doesn't impact the budget until fiscal 23, is phasing out the income tax on retirement income. That's a very expensive proposal. When it's fully implemented, it'll cost the state more than $300 million a year. And that's by the governor's estimate. The chart at the bottom half of the page tries to show you, well, how do we balance the budget while we're doing all this tax relief? So before you take into account the governor's legislative proposals, the budget is out of balance for fiscal 22 by about 188 million. Then there's all this tax relief that will impact the budget. And then the way the governor brings it all back into balance is through his Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act. It includes 826 million of spending reductions. More than half of that is putting less money into the rainy day fund than statute requires. So he's supposed to put almost 500 million into the rainy day fund in fiscal 22. He's proposing to relieve himself of 422 million of that requirement. As I said before, we still end up with $1 billion in the rainy day fund, which is 5% of general fund revenues, which is where the state often ends up. And then there's a variety of other cuts that I will talk about a little bit more later. The other big part of his balancing is some temporary revenue related actions, most notably the transfer tax, which supports things like program open space. The governor is proposing to take 101 million of the transfer tax in fiscal 22, send it to the general fund to help balance the budget. He backfills that transfer tax revenue with bonds to continue to do all the activities in program open space and related programs in fiscal 22, just doing with bonds rather than cash. So that's how we end up with 193 million fund balance. Let's go to the next slide. The graphic here looks at the budget a little differently. It looks at the structural budget outlook. So that focuses in just on ongoing revenues and ongoing spending. So it ignores fund balance transfers and one-time spending and things like that. And this is something the state has struggled with in the last 20 years to get anywhere close to structurally balanced on a regular basis. The governor's proposal for fiscal 22 has us very close to structurally balanced, only about 76 million short of that goal. And then you can see in the subsequent years, we're in the $400 to $500 million gap. That is actually a lot better than many of the recent forecasts that you may have seen. And I would note, if the retirement income phase out was not in the plan, we would be very close to structurally balanced in many of those out years as well. So what you do on the governor's tax proposals will impact whether this is as bad as it looks there or it gets better. But as I said, even with this outlook, it is in fact quite a bit better than some of the recent years have looked. All right, at the bottom of the page, I just want to highlight for you a few key features of the governor's budget in areas that might be of interest. The first is K through 12 education. Governor has fully funded all of the mandates that are in statute. He's also put extra money in from the Blueprint Fund, which is the money that's been set aside for education enhancements in legislation in the last few years. And what is he doing with these enhancements? Well, he's giving 214 million to school systems to hold them harmless for enrollment declines. The pandemic has resulted in a reduction in enrollment in the public schools of more than 2% statewide. So without this 214 million, a lot of the school systems would see decreases in their state support. The second thing that he's done is put 152 million into the from the Blueprint Fund into supplemental instruction and tutoring in fiscal 22, with the idea being here to try to help address learning loss that may be occurring with virtual learning and so forth during the pandemic. In terms of healthcare providers, the governor is accelerating a planned rate increase. It was supposed to be a 4% rate increase in July. He's moved it up to this January, so getting some more money to help providers, many of whom have been hurt by a reduced utilization of their services. Temporary cash assistance. This is an entitlement program for very poor individuals in the state. The governor is increasing the monthly benefit per recipient by $100 for the period January of this year through June of this year to try to help those people during the pandemic. Let's go to the next slide. A couple of other things to mention in terms of highlights. Local aid. The governor has fully funded almost all the local aid formulas. The major exception is community colleges. Community colleges were supposed to get 41 million of additional funding in fiscal 22 under statute. The governor only wants to give them 14 million of that. That is an action in the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act, so it's something the General Assembly will get to undo if it is not satisfied with this proposal. University System in Maryland gets 2% rate tuition increase for in-state students this year. One of the bigger cuts in the Budget Reconciliation Act is for the private colleges, and we will get money through what's called the Sellinger formula. It was supposed to grow $30 million, which is a huge increase for that program. The governor is level funding the program at the current year's level. In terms of state employees, the governor is not giving any sort of widespread salary increases in fiscal 22. What he has done is he's negotiated with the law enforcement officers union to give them a 4% salary increase, as well as a merit increase July 1. For the rest of the bargaining units, there's no guaranteed increases. Some bargaining units have agreed to a $500 bonus and a 1% COLA later in the year, like April of next year, if the revenues for the state exceed certain targets in the current year. The bargaining unit that did not agree to that is the largest one, AFSCME. So right now there's no planned increase at all for them, even if revenues exceed the targets. In terms of the capital budget, the governor is proposing $1.1 billion of general obligation bonds. This is consistent with what the Spending Affordability Committee had recommended. He's also supplementing that with over $200 million of bond premium to do additional projects. Of interest to you all is that he did not leave any room in his capital budget for your bond initiatives. So the budget committees will need to find capacity in order to fund legislative bond initiatives. The bottom of the page, we hit some potential legislative issues. The big ones are what you do with a veto of the Kerwin bill, and how much additional federal stimulus comes into the budget. I think we can skip the next slide, Maureen. All right, the next couple of pages go through the items in the governor's budget plan that are contingent on legislation. I think I've hit on most of the major ones on this page. Let's go to the next page. At the top here, the major contingent reductions in the BRFA, again, are the private colleges, the Sellinger formula, the community colleges through the CADE formula, and then level funding the Arts Council, which takes about $3 million away from them. And then you can see smaller reductions in that top grouping. The other big reduction on this page is the Maryland Health Benefit Exchange has a reinsurance fund that helps subsidize the health insurers so that they keep their rates down and more people can enroll in the individual market and keeping it affordable. That reinsurance fund is an enormous fund balance, and the governor is taking some of that money to support the Medicaid program, which relieves the general fund of costs. Those are sort of the major highlights. You can see the other items here on the list. We can go to the next slide. And we can skip this page. Yep, keep going. All right, so just a couple other topics I want to talk about, and then I'll leave it to you for questions. One relates to the Blueprint Fund, which, as I said before, is the way we fund K through 12 education enhancements. There's a lot of numbers on this page, but the top part is basically showing you where things are currently under the governor's budget plan. There's two major sources for the Blueprint Fund. One is the lockbox money from the Education Trust Fund, that's the casino revenues. The other is what's called the Blueprint Fund, which most of their revenue comes from online sales tax collections. And those two funds, by fiscal 23, are combined going to bring in about $1 billion a year into the Blueprint Fund for education enhancements. And when these were developed, the idea was that that would help fund the Kerwin program. So the top part of the chart shows with the veto, basically we build up a huge fund balance in that fund unless there's some education enhancements done in the out years. We would end up with almost $5 billion sitting in that fund by fiscal 26. The middle part of the chart shows you, well, okay, what happens if there is a veto override? And it takes into account three bills. There was a tax increase or applying the sales tax to digital downloads that was passed last year and vetoed by the governor. There was the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, the Kerwin bill itself, which adds a lot of spending. And it was also the Built to Learn Act, which was a school construction bill that bill is contingent on the Kerwin bill. So, and you can see in that line for blueprint and built to learn, it'll add, if you override the veto, over $1 billion of spending starting in fiscal 23, growing to 1.7 billion by fiscal 26. The good news is that the blueprint fund would pay for all of those costs through fiscal 25. Starting in fiscal 26, it would not be adequate to fully fund the Kerwin program, and you need to start providing some additional money, about 200 million in fiscal 26. That would grow to substantially larger amounts in subsequent years. So bottom line here is basically to say, with all the money you've dedicated to education, the Kerwin veto override would be affordable in the near term, but does still add significant costs in the longer term. Next slide. I just also wanted to show you how the governor is using the blueprint money that is in the budget for fiscal 22. I think I've hit on the big changes that you can see here, the hold harmless grants for the school systems, the additional money for supplemental instruction and tutoring, the 152 million. The big decrease is the pre-K supplemental grants. You see going down 10 million. That's because enrollment is way down, particularly in Baltimore City. That decline is going to be particularly pronounced for the city's funding. All right, let's skip over the next couple of slides. All right, the last topic I wanted to just highlight for you is the stimulus funding that's come in from the federal government. This chart shows you all the money that has come to the state between the CARES Act, which was back in the spring, and then the December stimulus. The blue bars are the CARES Act, the yellow bars are the December money. So about $30 billion is shown in this graphic. You can see over 18 billion if it went for business assistance, primarily through the payroll protection or paycheck protection program that went directly to various businesses from the federal government. But you can see there's also been substantial sums of money going into the health area to respond to the pandemic and into transportation to help support primarily transit through WMATA and MTA. So that's kind of the picture there. What is not shown in this chart is we've also gotten 8 billion of federally funded unemployment benefits for Maryland residents, much of it because there was an extra $600 provided in the spring and summer each week to people who were receiving unemployment. So that is a very brief, high-level look at kind of the budget and kind of the fiscal issues. I'm very happy to answer any specific questions anyone has.
All right. Oh my. Are there any questions here? We're going to start with Delegate Cardin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, David, for the comprehensive review. Just, you mentioned it in passing, and I want to make sure I understand. I've been looking at the issue with pensions and how we are underfunding pensions, and in the out years, it's going to have a huge impact on potential budget issues. Can you just remind us how serious this problem is and how far in the future we have to be looking?
So Maryland's pension system is currently 73% funded. So it's funded at, long-term at 73% of where it should be. The goal for most pension systems is to be at least at 80%. Now the state is on a trajectory. We've been improving. Back during the Great Recession, there were pension reforms implemented that increased the amount of money going into the pension system and move us toward that 80% funding goal. Right now, we're on pace to get there by fiscal 28. The governor's budget fully funds the actuarially required amount for the pension system and actually includes an extra 75 million on top of that, which is mandated by law to sort of expedite our movement toward reaching at least 80% funding.
All right, Delegate Conaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Romans, for coming in and giving us this presentation. On the HBCU money, you said, did you say it was a difference of about 100 million on that or something? What did you say on that?
On HBCU, I'm sorry?
Yes. Did you mention HBCU?
I did not speak to the HBCU. There's no money to respond to the legislation that was passed last year and vetoed in the governor's budget.
No, okay, no money to respond to that. And for the bond bill initiatives, there's no money for that?
He did not set aside any money for that, so the General Assembly will need to cut the governor's capital budget or find other revenues to support your bond initiatives.
Thank you so very much.
Delegate Williams.
Yes, I just had a quick question. I wanted to go back to the, I guess, with the state employees. You mentioned there was a 4% increase for law enforcement proposed in the budget based on collective bargaining. Other smaller collective bargaining units, I guess, opted for, I guess, kind of a bonus.
Yes, a $500 bonus and a 1% increase next April. But both of those are contingent on revenues in the current year exceeding the official revenue estimate the state has.
Okay. And then nothing for everyone else. When was the last time there was a salary increase for state employees?
Actually, state employees just got a 2% salary increase January 1st.
So really kind of just keeping up with the cost of inflation then.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. That's all.
All right. Are there other questions for the panel? Have you been able, I guess I've got a broader question with regard to drug treatment, which obviously wasn't necessarily directly covered by the briefing. But one of the issues that I've started to hear about is providers on the backside, when they are ready to receive people into drug treatment, they're not getting as many people into drug treatment because there are more people who are being particularly into drug treatment that is as a result of a release under 8507 of the health article. So they were being held, they were found to be amenable by the health department, and now they're coming out the back. They're going to inpatient or outpatient treatment. Did you get a sense in the governor's budget that he was cutting funding for drug treatment?
We do not have that sense at this point. I don't know how much it's increasing, but my understanding is there was no cut to drug treatment, but we can get you more precise numbers.
All right. It strikes me that drug treatment is one of those things where the cost is about the same, if there's 100 people in it or 150 people in it. It's kind of difficult to make a cut based on a shift in the number of people because you have certain costs for specialists that stay static. But I guess I'd be interested in seeing if there was a change in the amount of payments to people who provide 8507 placements in the last 3 fiscal years. Are there other questions that people have for the panel or for Mr. Romans? Okay, well, that's fine. We will finish it right there. We will then come back at 2:30 to do bill hearings. And we thank you very much for giving us our annual fiscal briefing. Thank you very much.